When we think of grand strategy, one name usually comes to mind: Sid Meier. We picture the sprawling maps of civilization, the massive tech trees, and that legendary just one more turn addiction. Looking at modern titles, it feels like this entire genre was willed into existence by a single genius. But the truth is, it wasn't. Civilization didn't just appear out of nowhere, it was built on the bones of older, forgotten worlds. Ideas that were borrowed, adapted, and sometimes flat out stolen. To understand where the 4X genre actually came from, we have to look past the modern graphics and go back decades before anyone was building the pyramids on a PC. Because the true blueprint for world domination didn't start with Sid Meier, it started in the shadows. (1972). The Evergreen State College. While the rest of the world was watching the Apollo mission wind down, a student named Peter Langston was quietly building a universe inside an HP 2000 minicomputer. He wanted to call it Diplomacy, but the machine's file system had a strict limit of 6 characters. So forced by hardware limitations, he borrowed the name of a legendary board game from his time at Reed College. He called it Empire. The irony? In an interview, Langston admitted, "Even though I borrowed the name Empire from the game at Reed, I didn't actually use any of the Reed game in my Empire, since I never played it." Every world was entirely unique, built by an algorithm that simulated volcanoes to form continents and scattered hidden veins of gold and iron. The interface was brutal. There were no screens, no mouse, no joystick. To see the map, you didn't look at the monitor, you waited for the teletype to physically print it out, row by row, character by character. But underneath the screwed exterior lay a complexity that rivals modern titles. While later games focused purely on military tactics, Langston's Empire was an economic beast. You didn't just build tanks, you had to extract the raw materials to forge them. Decades before the internet connected us all, Empire was supporting up to 100 players simultaneously. A persistent world that ran for months.
Some of them games that were very popular, even to the point of being kind of destructive in terms of students who played the games rather than doing their homework. A game called Empire was kind of famous for people committing academic suicide.
Alliances were formed in the cafeteria and betrayed on the printout. It was, in essence, the first massively multiplayer online game, running on a hardware that couldn't even display a JPEG. But like many relics of that era, it was fragile. When the college finally retired the HP 2000, the original basic source code was lost, wiped, gone forever. What remains are memories, and the lingering ghost of a game that already existed 2 years before Stellar Conquest. Decades later, former players still recall having the source code punched into paper tape. They kept printed copies of the massive rulebook on hand, not to read it at a screen, but to debate strategies with friends. As for Langston himself, his focus extended far beyond the terminal. He was a polymath who authored academic papers, exploring the fascinating intersections of computing, games and audio, and would even go on to become the very first employee of Lucasfilm Games. Ultimately, he left the digital fields behind, dedicating his life to his deep passion for music and organizing acoustic band camps. Yet his game's legacy endured. Today, just like in the early days, you can find countless variants of the game. The version that survived is open source. It was originally forged by a group called Wolfpack, and players use it to this very day. Anyone can host their own server, and through a modern web interface, you can engage with people worldwide in relentless campaigns that take weeks or months to finish. Down the coast in California, another mind had been brewing similar thoughts. A young man named Walter Bright had already begun conceptualizing his own mechanics of war and conquest. Years later, in 1977 at Caltech, Bright finally sat at a PDP-10 terminal to bring those concepts to life. Completely unaware of the other game, he also called his creation Empire. He had no idea the evergreen simulation existed. He had never heard of Peter Langston. It was a pure convergent evolution. Unlike the massive multiplayer simulation up north, this wasn't written in BASIC, but in Fortran 10. But the most fascinating part of the story isn't the code, it's how it's bred. Bright didn't release the game. It was stolen. Someone breached the Caltech security, copied the source code and leaked it onto the ARPANET. It appeared on servers on the other side of the state. Walter Bright had lost control. His game had escaped the lab. It hit the academic world like a plague. At Caltech, the addiction was so severe that students were failing classes. Bright was reportedly threatened by a peer because the game was ruining his GPA. You start with one city, build units, production takes time, 5 turns 1 army, 10 for a fighter. But ironically, when Bright tried to sell it officially on the Heathkit H11, he sold exactly 2 copies. It seemed the world wasn't ready to pay for what they had already stolen. It wasn't until 1987 that the game officially broke out. It took a complete rewrite in the C programming language and a rebranding as Empire, Wargame of the Century, to finally turn the underground legend into a commercial product. For 10 years it remained a privilege for the few, locked away in the ivory towers of computer science, uploaded under false names, just to survive the night. Developer Mark Baldwin and publisher Interstel finally ported the code to the personal computers like Amiga and DOS. Visually, it was stark, but this simplicity was a deliberate design choice. Now the addiction moved from the campus to the living room. Unlike the scattered stars of 1983, Empire generated actual geography, a mechanic that would become essential for the genre's longevity. Every time you start a game, the computer synthesized a completely unique planet, continents, islands, and oceans that were created from scratch. You weren't playing a fixed scenario. The map itself became a primary opponent. But the real brilliance of Empire was in its logistics. It wasn't enough to simply build a massive army, you had to move it. The game turned the simple act of expansion into a complex puzzle of transport ships, sea lanes and beachheads. This created a different kind of addiction. It wasn't about the next turn, it was about the supply chain, the friction of war. The satisfying yet frustrating puzzle of getting a tank from one factory on one continent to a front line on another. A young game designer named Sid Meier took notes. He saw the mechanical brilliance of the procedural map and filed it away for a later project. But while the mechanics were solid, the presentation was still clinical, cold. To truly break into the mainstream, genre didn't just need better rules, it needed a personality. Walter Bright would go on to create a deep programming language and write the first native C++ compiler. But for gamers, his legacy is simple. He didn't just write a game, he built a bridge. The bridge that took us from the text-based darkness of the 70s to the golden age of the 90s. In 1991, the Cold War was ending, leaving a power vacuum in its wake. The Berlin Wall was gone, and the Soviet Union was crumbling. But while the real world was losing its old order, a new one was booting up on our desks. The beige boxes were no longer just for spreadsheets or simple arcade ports. With the rise of VGA graphics and the precision of the mouse, the PC was finally powerful enough to simulate history, not just display it. Empires fell in reality, but on the screen the blueprint for all future empires was being drawn. Sid Meier was already a legend, but he was known for flight simulators, for reproducing reality. Yet, he was bored of it.
You can do something with the computer that you can't do in real life. Nobody's going to give you an F-15 to fly and say, go up there, have a good time. And if they did, you'd probably not make a success out of it.
Sid Meier wasn't alone. Beside him was Bruce Shelley. They were the Lennon and McCartney of strategy games. Together they shifted from piloting the machine to building the world. He called it the God game. A genre where you didn't react, you planned. Civilization, the name was licensed from a board game by Francis Tresham, but the soul was pure Sid Meier. He didn't want to copy the rules. He wanted to simulate a feeling of history. It was digital fusion for his love for Avalon Hill board games and computer logic. It introduced the tech tree to the masses. You weren't just unlocking stats. You were guiding humanity from the caves to the stars. Suddenly, games weren't just toys. They were educational. You learned about bronze working, monotheism, and nuclear fission. Parents loved it. Teachers loved it. Many think Civilization is a historical simulation. It is not. Sid Meier had a controversial rule. Fun comes first. History comes second.
We generally try and make our decisions in the game, especially in a game like Civilization, based on what's fun, what makes the best game. And then we go back to the history books and try and justify it with some historical fact.
This is why Gandhi uses nukes. This is why phalanxists can sink battleships. Sid Meier didn't want to lecture. He wanted a series of interesting decisions. Looking back, the graphics seem screwed. But Meier argued that this was a feature, not a bug. High-end graphics, he said, force a specific vision on you.
What I'm trying to do is get the game to take place in your imagination, not on the screen. Sometimes if what happens on the screen is too realistic, it almost makes you have that vision of what's going on instead of what you would imagine yourself. So, I would claim that the basic, simple graphics of Civilization is a feature in a sense that it encourages you to create your own vision of what's going on.
But he gave the imagination fuel. A game so massive, it needed its own encyclopedia, the Civilopedia. It turned the game into a library. Parents bought it for education. Kids played it for world domination. And crucially, he redefined victory. In most war games, you won by killing everyone. In Civilization, the ultimate triumph was to leave them behind. Civilization didn't create the genre, it created a standard that every other game in the genre would follow. Every game that followed is just a footnote to Sid Meier's code. Sid Meier didn't just give us history, he pointed us to the stars. He prepared us for what was coming next.